Good afternoon, and welcome to the Young Scholars Program Developing Strong Full Applications webinar hosted by the Foundation for Child Development. Congratulations on making it to this stage of the 2023 Ysp application cycle. So my name is Andrea Kent, and I am the Program Officer at the Foundation for Child Development. The Foundation has a long-standing commitment to supporting early career scholars by enhancing strong research. We are delighted that everyone is on the call today to learn more about the Ysp process and to help you develop your full applications. We are looking forward to receiving them. Joining me on today's call are former board member and previous Ysp Advisory Committee member, Dr. Vivian Gadsden. Dr. Gadsden is a William T. Carter Professor of Child Development and Education at the University of Pennsylvania. Also on today's call are former Ysp scholar Dr. Krista Pereira, Professor of Social Medicine in the School of Medicine at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Vice President of the Foundation, Dr. Sarah Vecchiotti, who will be reading through our FAQ toward the end of today's webinar. We would like to thank both Krista and Vivian for sharing their expertise and time with us today. Before we get started, I'll go over some logistics. To submit your questions, please use the Q&A feature on your webinar taskbar. Please do not use the chat feature to submit your questions. Please limit your questions to those of general interest. Please do not submit questions that are specific to your proposal, your particular research design, or your anticipated data collection methods. If you do have questions pertaining to your specific proposal, please send them to ysp@fcd-us.org. Questions can be submitted at any time throughout the webinar. Questions regarding technical difficulties with the GoToWebinar platform will be answered as soon as possible, and questions regarding webinar content will be answered at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. Additional resources to assist with the application are available and can be downloaded from the handouts feature on your webinar window. All of these resources can also be found on the Foundation's website. Today's webinar is being recorded. All registrants will receive an email once the recording is available. The purpose of today's webinar is to help you prepare a strong grant proposal and full application submission. Guidance will be provided on refining your research questions, linking your research questions with policy, practice, and theory, developing quantitative and qualitative analytic plans, and obtaining feedback and guidance from senior scholars. We will also cover application proposal content, expectations for mentors and mentees, common mistakes to avoid in your proposal, and the full application evaluation criteria and guidance about Ysp Advisory Committee expectations. Finally, we will review a frequently asked questions and end with an open Q&A session. To help provide guidance on the upcoming submission process, I will now review the main components of the online application and then describe some of the grant requirements briefly. The full application form is structured similarly to the letter of intent form that was submitted in June. Form questions that appeared on your approved LOI will be preloaded with your previous responses. Each section requires specific information and/or materials to be submitted to complete the application process. Please review these sections and edit your responses as necessary. In addition, there are sections of the full application that require supporting materials that will be uploaded as attachments. For example, the budget template, the timeline or work plan, the bibliography, the CV, etc. Please refer to the Applicant Checklist as a guide to keep track of all of the full application requirements. The maximum written length of the full proposal is 21 pages, not including supporting materials. 2 letters of recommendation in support of the proposed project must be submitted as part of the application. Letters may discuss the proposed research and the quality of the research questions, significance of the proposed research, and soundness of the proposed methodology and plans for analysis. Letters may also discuss the recommender's personal and professional impressions of the applicant. Please be advised that in order for the full application to be considered complete, the letters of recommendation must be submitted before the full application deadline. Applications will not be considered if the letters of recommendation are submitted after the submission deadline. The full application is due on October 13th, 2022 by 8 p.m. EST. For the budget, the maximum grant award, including indirect costs, is $225,000 for proposed projects involving either primary data collection or mixed methods. The maximum grant award, including indirect costs, is $180,000 for proposed projects solely focusing on secondary data analysis. Grant funds are to be used over a 2 to 3 year period and are intended to support the applicant's salary as the PI and direct research expenses. In general, up to 10% of direct personnel costs may be used towards senior advisors and consultants. Indirect and overhead costs are limited to 15% of direct personnel costs. The Foundation has created 3 checklists as resources to assist with the application process. The Applicant Checklist explains both the LOI and the full application requirements and materials necessary for submission. The Mentor-Mentee Checklist was created to help applicants and mentors develop clear expectations and parameters regarding the roles and responsibilities of the mentor-mentee during the application process. The Institutional Checklist can be used as a tool for applicants in communicating the administrative application requirements with their institution or organization. The checklists are available to download in the handout section of the webinar taskbar. They can also be found on the Ysp page on the Foundation's website. Finally, a few years ago, we added a new resource to support the development of a strong proposal. We are sharing examples of strong responses to full application questions as additional guidance when developing the proposal. This packet is a compilation of exemplary responses to the following sections: research project basis and research questions, current state of knowledge and the significance of the present study, public policy and or practice relevance, methodologies and measures, and finally, data analysis approach. The examples represent excerpted written responses from various previously awarded proposals. With each example, an overview of the project, the form question, the applicant's response, and annotations are provided. We also extend our appreciation to the former Ysp scholars who are willing to share their work to help current and future Ysp applicants. In the event that you are selected for a grant award, the following apply. The affiliated institution must confirm that you are a full-time paid employee for the duration of the 2 or 3 year grant period. Applicants as the PIs are required to submit annual and final narrative and financial reports. The funded research project should result in at least one manuscript suitable for publication where the applicant as the PI is the first author. The PIs designated as the Foundation's Young Scholars will be invited to attend periodic meetings with expenses paid for by the Foundation. Travel and expenses to these meetings are not to be included in your grant budget. The Foundation hopes to award 3 grants from the pool of 36 approved LOIs who were invited to submit full applications. In the spring of 2020, the Foundation unveiled a new opportunity stemming from the Young Scholars Program. The promising scholars are Young Scholars Program applicants who demonstrate exceptional potential to conduct rigorous, high-quality implementation research focused on the early care and education workforce. In collaboration with the Urban Institute, our promising scholars will receive resources and support to assist in further refining their research skills and knowledge. This $15,000 award will support the following: stipends for the scholars and their mentors, attendance at the Ysp Professional Learning Convening, and activities outlined in your individualized professional development plan. Promising scholars for the 2023 cohort will be identified from those applicants who proceed through the semifinalist stage of evaluation and will be based on recommendations made by the Ysp Advisory Committee. There are 3 scholars from last year's Ysp application cycle who received awards as our 2022 cohort of promising scholars, and 4 scholars from the previous year's 2021 cohort. Please visit our website to learn more about them and their work. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn the webinar over to Dr. Krista Pereira, who will present on developing a strong research proposal.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here today, and you can move to the next slide. So I was among the first cohort of the Foundation's Young Scholars and found the program to be tremendously valuable. As a young scholar, I had the opportunity to develop my own research interests, meet fellows who shared my interests, initiate relationships that stimulated innovation and future collaborations, and develop a lasting relationship with a foundation that shared my goals for improving practice and policy. The foundation provides a great service to the community by making these fellowships available. Thus, it's really important that the proposals be highly focused on the foundation's priority areas. Next slide. Next, there you go. Thank you. In preparing your LOIs, you have already demonstrated your commitment to the Foundation's priority funding areas. You've defined research aims focused on the Foundation's priority populations and consistent with the Foundation's priority funding areas. You've demonstrated the potential significance of your research for improving policy and practice in these priority areas. You've succinctly described the research design and methods you will use to complete the research, provided evidence of your capacity to complete the research, and provided evidence of institutional capacity and support. In preparing your full proposal, you will build on your LOI with particular attention to addressing the feedback you received on your LOI submission. The full proposal has about 9 sections with specific character limits on each section. The 10th section of the proposal that's not listed here is the budget. Please note that the character limits include spaces for sections 1 through 9. You cannot go over the character limit. Also note that equations are not easily inputted into a web-based submission system. Thus, if you have included equations, these might be best included as an attached table or figure, and your text should refer the reader to the appropriate table or figure. So for the remainder of this webinar, we're going to talk through each of these sections and how to organize the proposal. Next slide. In this slide, I'm showing a generic proposal outline. What I want to point out here is the parallelism in each section. Reviewers need to be able to find your information quickly and link the ideas between sections. Thus, if you have 3 research aims or questions, they should be clearly articulated in section 2. Then in section 3, you will want to discuss the policy or practice relevance of each. In section 4 through 7, you will do the same. Organizing your proposal with a systematic structure such as this one will ensure that you address the required topics for each of your research questions or aims. Next slide. Overall, the key goals of your proposal are to refine your research questions and provide the theoretical or empirical basis for the project, Strengthen the case for the significance of your research to policy and practice. Develop a strong conceptual model and argument for your contributions to the literature or your field of study. And articulate a well-defined and feasible research design and plan for conducting your research. And finally, you want to show how the work you will have done in the past has prepared you to conduct this study. Next slide. To make sure that you can build the strongest case possible, it will be essential to plan your time and include enough time for you to obtain feedback and edits from your senior colleagues. This slide provides you with a guide to structuring your time. You should have already contacted senior advisors for letters of support or consultation, and you should already be circulating your research aims to these senior advisors for additional discussion and feedback. Finally, you should set a date with these advisors or colleagues for a mock review of your proposal. By mid-September, you want to make sure that you have a full draft of your proposal to share with your senior advisors or others who can provide you with a mock review. You will notice here that I recommend writing the methods section first. I often write papers and grants from the inside out. This is because as you write up the methods, you become increasingly aware of the challenges you will face in data collection or data analysis, and this sometimes leads you to restructure your aims and backgrounds accordingly. In fact, I often write the budget soon after the methods. This helps me realize what is truly feasible with the type of funding available. Reviewers can easily spot projects that are overly ambitious and not feasible within the time frame and budget allowed by the grant. Next slide. After the executive summary, which is often written last, the first section of your proposal will be the research questions and design section, section 2. You want to think of this section as a funnel that takes the reader from your broad, overarching research question or idea down to the specific hypotheses. This section should start with a brief statement about what motivates your research question, and a few sentences to reference the theoretical or empirical foundations for your research. This information helps to orient the reviewer to your project. Then you will want to propose your overall or general research question. For example, how does health in early childhood shape adult outcomes? This question is quite broad and needs to be broken down into more specific research questions or specific aims. For example, I might specifically be interested in evaluating how early childhood obesity influences educational outcomes and how obesity influences labor market outcomes. These are two distinct aims. But again, we can delve deeper. These aims need to be re-specified as specific hypotheses that are grounded in theory and previous empirical research. Thus, for each aim, you will have a specific hypothesis, such as children ages 5 to 8 with BMIs of greater than 25 will be less likely to graduate high school. This hypothesis tells the reviewer what your dependent variable is, what your independent variable is, and the direction of the association you expect. In section 3 of the proposal, you'll have more space to delve deeper into the rationale for your aims and hypotheses with a lit review on the state of knowledge and project significance. For this webinar, I've specifically created an example here that was outside of the scope of the Foundation's interests and goals. However, as you think about developing these aims, pay close attention to the Foundation's ECE workforce goals. The ECE workforce plays a critical role in promoting healthy social, emotional, and cognitive development in children. Thus, the Foundation wants your help in identifying strategies that can improve the preparation, competency, compensation, well-being, and ongoing professional learning of the ECE workforce. All projects should also focus on understanding the successful implementation of ECE programs and policies, what works or not, for whom, and under what conditions. Next slide. Having refined your research questions and hypotheses, you now want the reviewers of your proposal to understand the theoretical and empirical basis for each of your specific aims. This section also works like a funnel. You take the reviewer from broad theoretical frameworks like the ecological model for child development and funnel them down into the previous empirical research that supports your hypotheses. A good review of the theory and literature often results in an overarching conceptual model that shows how different concepts or variables may relate to one another. It prepares the reviewer for the methods, and after a well-done literature review, the methods should be obvious to the reader or reviewer. Next slide. This type of overarching conceptual model can often be simplified into a graphic and provided as an attached figure. This is an example which I've made up. The figure implies that the ECE workforce characteristics and ECE child characteristics will affect program characteristics, and these program characteristics will affect program effectiveness. It relates a set of independent variables to dependent variables from left to right. Next slide. Having convinced the reader that your research is significant, innovative, and novel, you want to turn to its practical relevance. In Section 4, you must make the case that your results will have implications for policy and practice. The Foundation is not interested in research for the sake of research. They want research to result in information and tools that can be used to support meaningful change. To promote meaningful change, your work will also need a strong dissemination plan that goes beyond standard academic outlets to reach policymakers as well as community stakeholders. Throughout the discussion of policy and practice, remember to pay close attention to the Foundation's priority populations listed in the Ysp guidelines. Next slide. With an understanding of the significance and implications for policy and practice, the reviewers will be prepared for the methods in sections 5 to 7. The methods section starts with a description of the type of research you will conduct and the population or sample that will be your focus. The Foundation allows for proposals that will not be collecting their own data, but use data that already have been collected by others. I refer to this type of research as research using secondary data. The Foundation also allows for proposals that involve collecting new data. I refer to this as primary data and discuss two approaches for primary data collection: the collection of data from a survey and the collection of data through qualitative interviews. There are many other approaches. These two, however, seem to be among the most common and are the methods often used by applicants. Finally, I'm going to say a few words about another type of research, and that is intervention research. If you are using secondary data, there are several questions that you should answer about your data in the summary of the data, and I've outlined these here. For example, what is your data set? What populations does it represent? What is your sample size, and how are you handling missing data? How are the data collected? Are there specific populations oversampled, and why? What was the response rate for the data? What are some key characteristics, race, age, sex, of the sample relevant to your research? Next slide. If you are collecting your own data by designing a survey, you must answer a similar set of questions. Who will the data represent? For example, children in a single state or a single school? What is your expected sample size and your sampling strategy? Are you using a random sample, a clustered sample through schools, a convenient sample? How will the data be collected? By phone, by tablet, by web? Will you provide incentives to participate? What response rate do you expect and why? How will you deal with attrition if you're collecting data over time? And how long will it take you to collect the data? You will need to think through each of these questions, and they will each have budget implications. If you are working with institutions like schools to collect the data, provide evidence, like letters of support, that they will agree to work with you. And during the age of COVID, you should also consider and discuss how data collection will be managed to protect the safety of all team members and participants. Next slide. If you are collecting your own data by conducting qualitative interviews, many of the same questions need to be answered. You should also start with letting the reviewers know what particular type of qualitative approach you will be using. For example, are you going to be using a phenomenological approach? Are you conducting a case study? Are you conducting an ethnography? Then let them know what population groups will be the focus of your qualitative work. Once the reviewer knows your general approach, you can provide additional details. And again, you'll want to indicate how will you identify or select your respondents? Why have you chosen that strategy? What are its benefits or limits? How many respondents will you select and why? How long will you interview them? Where will you interview them? Will you record your interviews? What type of participation incentive will you provide? And again, if you're working with community-based organizations to select respondents, provide evidence that they will work with you. For those of you considering qualitative interviewing as we manage COVID-19, I want you to know that I've also been working with research teams to conduct qualitative interviews and focus groups via Zoom. These have been with Spanish-speaking and foreign-born Latino population, and it has worked successfully. Next slide. Lastly, some of you may be collecting data as part of an intervention. This will require some additional information in Section 6. You will need to provide details about what the intervention is and how you will set up treatment and control groups. In many cases involving primary data collection, you may be working with institutions to collect data. And just another reminder, when your work depends on institutions and individuals, you will need letters of support from those individuals or institutions as evidence that they will work with you. Next slide. So after describing the data intervention or the data collection approach, you will then want to describe your measures. And this is done in the second part of Section 6. All data have measures, whether it is secondary data, primary survey data, or primary qualitative data. They are the questions asked and the information provided by respondents. Reviewers need to know what these measures are and why you have chosen them. Most importantly, reviewers need to know that the measures you are using are of high quality and culturally and linguistically appropriate for your study population. It can be hard to succinctly summarize your measures and connect them with each of your aims, so sometimes an overview via a table can help to organize the information on measures. Next slide. So Section 7 of the proposal takes the reviewer deeper into the research with a focus on how the analysis will be performed. The analytic plan needs to be described for statistical analysis of either secondary data or primary survey data. It also needs to be described for qualitative analysis. In describing a statistical analysis, you'll need to answer some of the following questions. What is the statistical model that you will use for the analysis? What are the benefits of the model? What are its limitations? How do various models contribute to understanding the data and answering the research question? How much power will you have to conduct your analysis? And how will you account for sampling design and weights if you have them in your work? You need to repeat this information for each aim. If the same general approach will be used for all aims, you should state this. Next slide. In writing your analytic plan for qualitative analysis, you should answer another set of questions. Will interviews be transcribed? What software package, if any, will you use to analyze the interviews? How will the interviews be analyzed and coded? If there are multiple coders, how will reliability of the coding be evaluated? Next slide. Throughout the development of your proposal, as you consider the research, theory, sample, measures, and analysis plan, please do pay attention to cultural and linguistic appropriateness. For example, have the measures that you are using been validated for the language and population in which you are working? If not, how will you translate and validate your measures? Next slide. The foundation also asks you to attach a research timeline, and this slide shows you what a generic 3-year timeline might look like. Next slide. With your fully developed analytic plan in place, you will write the last 2 sections of your proposal. First, in Section 8, you want to respond to the advisory committee's feedback. Although sometimes feedback can be frustrating to read, this is not the place to be argumentative. Address the feedback matter-of-factly by explaining what you did in response to the reviewer's questions or concerns. In fact, it is a good idea to sketch out your responses to this feedback as a first step in writing and preparing to write the proposal. Then come back to it and edit it after you've finished the proposal. Next slide. So before turning to the budget, I want to highlight Section 9 of the proposal. And this section provides you with an opportunity to discuss your relevant experience. This is really where you need to make yourself shine. Make the case for your capacity to complete the project successfully and highlight your strengths with specific examples. At the same time, recognize and address your weaknesses. One key way to address your weaknesses is to seek out senior faculty or advisors that have knowledge and experience that you do not. For example, if you have never done qualitative research before, but plan to do so as part of this proposal, make sure that you have a senior advisor with qualitative research experience on your team. The Foundation wants to support mentorship of its young scholars. Thus, they are allowing for a small portion of your budget to go towards paying for consultations with senior researchers. Next slide. As you are developing your research plan, you will want to consider the budget. Here are some of the steps I usually take to prepare my own budget. First, I need to determine what the non-personnel costs are. Then I need to figure out the personnel costs. My effort, the personnel costs are my effort and the effort needed by any research assistant. Your effort and the effort of research assistants will typically be the bulk of the grant. Don't underestimate the time you need to supervise data collection or analysis, or to do it yourself. You should have at least 1 to 3 months of effort for each grant year. For primary data collection projects, your maximum grant is $225,000, and that includes the direct non-personnel costs, direct personnel costs, and 15% indirect on direct personnel costs. For secondary data analysis, the maximum grant is $180,000. Senior advisors can be included in your grant, but the funds going to senior advisors should be no more than 10% of your personnel costs. If you had no non-personnel costs, the maximum amount of the money for senior advisors would be about $15,000 for secondary data analysis and $19,000 for primary data collection. In reality, you should be thinking in the range of 2 to 5 days of consulting per year at a cost of $2,000 to $5,000 per year. Next slide. Senior advisors can be very helpful, especially on a first grant. Identifying and choosing one or more senior scholars to work with is an important step in your career. You want to make this selection wisely with consideration of their location, their experience, and their reputation. You also want to contact them early and make it easy for them to help you. This means you should provide them with a copy of your CV and your letter of intent. Once they have agreed to help you, it means drafting a letter for them that they can then tailor. At least one of the 2 required letters of support must discuss the quality of the research questions, significance of the proposed research, and soundness of the proposed methodology and plans for analysis. Next slide. In closing, we want to remind you all of the importance of getting feedback, reflecting, and editing. The best feedback is critical feedback. It helps you identify gaps in your logic and pushes you to clarify. So don't argue with somebody who is kind enough to take the time to review your work. Accept their feedback graciously and address their concerns attentively. Thank you for your time.
Many thanks to Krista for her presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Vivian Gadsden, William T. Carter Professor of Child Development and Education at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Gadsden is a former Foundation Board member and previous Ysp Advisory Committee member who will provide guidance on the mentor-mentee expectations and insight into the review process.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It is always a pleasure to participate in this session and to share a little of what we have learned over the years that may be helpful to you in preparing your application. I want to congratulate you on reaching this important milestone in the process and for having your LOIs accepted. I am extremely proud of the Young Scholars Program and former fellows like Krista who are making such important contributions to our field. These are contributions that you too will make as your careers move forward and flourish. At this stage, you are likely refining your ideas and approaches. That is, I hope you are refining your ideas and approaches. Working with mentors to develop a strong application is critical at this point and throughout the process. We would like to take this opportunity to thank the mentors for making the commitment and sharing their time and expertise to assist the applicants in crafting a strong application. We feel that the mentor-mentee relationship is crucial to developing a competitive proposal. It is a special relationship, and we encourage mentors and mentees to define their roles and responsibilities together and determine the preferred method of communication. We also urge applicants to ask for direct and targeted feedback from mentors. Because you are so invested in your idea and the proposal represents work in which you have been engaged over time, possibly dating back to your dissertation, you may find it difficult to hear critical feedback. However, please keep in mind that it is designed to support you in refining your rich ideas, not diminish you or your ideas, and build a strong proposal and research trajectory. We hope that you will not fear the critical feedback, as Krista has noted, all of which will be designed to enhance your work. We also want to urge mentors to be as direct as needed, offering critical feedback or directing mentees to human and material resources that can strengthen their ideas and provide a clearly written and competitive proposal. Now, mentors and senior scholars do not necessarily need to have content expertise in the research area you are proposing. In fact, having someone who may not work in your specific area of study or field, but who knows research and could read your draft with clarity would be helpful. At the very least, applicants should review the proposed research project with at least one mentor or senior scholar prior to its submission. From experience and observation, I can assure you that you and your application will be advantaged by the insights or from the insights of the mentors. You might also, you might also find yourself in need of having multiple mentors or colleagues to assist you with your application, especially if you are seeking specific supports or content expertise for which your current mentor is unfamiliar. You might work with your current mentor and additional mentors or colleagues to receive feedback on all aspects of your proposal. It is fine to work with several mentors and colleagues to fully develop your proposal, especially if you think an additional mentor will better suit your needs for the specific research questions you are posing. Be sure to be very explicit with your mentor about your expectations for working with them at the start of your application process. Please utilize the mentor-mentee checklist that can be found on the Foundation website and is linked in the resources section of this webinar to guide the conversation. You may ask, how do we see the mentor's role? We see the mentor's role as a thought partner, sounding board, and an objective reviewer to support the mentee's research proposal. Specifically, we expect that mentors with knowledge of Ysp guidelines will provide constructive feedback on the research questions, design, measures, analysis, and budget, particularly to ensure that the applicant's ideas are clear, that issues are targeted, that the proposed work is empirically grounded, and that the proposal is cogent and well written. We expect that the mentor will have at least reviewed one draft of the application and provided suggestions for improvement. We would also expect, if asked by the applicant mentee, that the mentor would provide a letter of recommendation. The letter of recommendation is read carefully to gain an understanding of how your recommender is assessing the rigor of your proposed work. While this requirement may be met by having your mentor write a letter, it is not a requirement for the mentor to do so. So now that we have talked about the mentor's role, what should applicants, mentees do? For the purposes of Ysp, we define the applicants, mentees as early career scholars who are seeking to strengthen their body of work by being open to and responsive to constructive feedback that advances their research and professional trajectory. We expect you to appreciate your mentors, by being respectful of their time and always being prepared with specific questions, as well as providing your mentors with your best work. Be considerate and provide mentors with adequate time to address your request and review your work. Keep in mind that as busy as you may be, your mentor is probably equally busy. Finally, consider your mentor's input by being reflective of and responsive to their advice and guidance. It may be helpful to share this presentation with your mentors. It will be linked on the Foundation's website shortly, as Andrea noted. We are emphasizing the importance that the Foundation attributes to this delicate but extremely rich, important relationship in developing strong research proposals. We hope these slides can provide clarification to both the mentors and mentees about our expectations for this supportive working relationship. So next, I would like to help answer 3 questions. The first is, what are reviewers looking for? The second is, what are common mistakes that applicants make? And finally, what are some tips to avoid these mistakes? So first, what are reviewers looking for? An interdisciplinary advisory committee will review the full application according to the following criteria: support of the Ysp purpose and research focus, research concept and methodology, cultural and linguistic sensitivity, applicants' qualifications, and institutional support and capacity. There are 9 full application evaluation questions. Each question is equal in weight and worth a total of 45 points. The first selection criterion is support of the Ysp purpose and research focus. This criterion is scored using 3 out of the 9 full application evaluation questions. The first question assesses how well the proposed research supports the Ysp purpose. In particular, reviewers are interested in how well you are addressing the relationships among the early childhood education workforce, quality of professional practice, and/or the learning and development of the priority populations. The second question will ask the committee to consider how significant the proposed research is in contributing to the field of scientific inquiry into the implementation of specific early care and education programs and policies. This question encompasses how well does the research confirm or add unique knowledge to the research base? How well does it lead to a greater understanding of the priority populations and the issues that they face? The third question will focus on the project's public policy and/or program practice impact. For example, the proposal should answer, what is the relevance and utility of this study for both informing policymakers and practitioners' understanding of the issue, as well as having practical relevance for a likely positive impact on policies and/or programs? How much potential is there for policymakers and practitioners to learn from and use the findings? Please also be specific about how you see different audiences using the anticipated research findings. The 4th, 5th, and 6th evaluation questions will assess the strength and quality of the proposed research concept, methodology, and analytic approaches. How realistic is the project, given the grant amount and the time permitted? Excuse me. Please know that we admire your ambition, but the amount of funds available is not enough to develop a field. The committee will consider how well the project is designed from its research questions, its rationale, methods, and analytical perspectives. As the proposed work is only a slice of your body of research, be selective about the questions that you can address with the funds and that will inform your ongoing research. The application should describe what the proposed research is based on. Therefore, please describe either the theory or the empirically established basis for your working hypothesis. For example, the theoretical or empirical rationale should help explain why the research questions and measures were selected. In addition, the design should be free from confounding variables, and the measures selected should be appropriate for the study sample. For those using existing data, the application should describe what the data set has been used for previously, and then how the proposed research adds, not repeats, information for the field. The seventh question relates to the cultural and linguistic sensitivity of the proposed research. Are the methodology, measures, and data analysis approaches utilized in the research culturally and linguistically sensitive? For example, you should consider whether the tone of the proposed study is asset-oriented or deficit-oriented, and whether it speaks to the knowledge base regarding populations that are different by race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexuality, and other identity markers. The eighth question considers several aspects of the applicant's background and qualifications. For example, based on the responses in the proposal, do the applicant's skills and previous experience support familiarity with the research area and/or completing the proposed research successfully? Finally, for the ninth question, the advisory committee considers whether applicants and their institutions have the combination of skills and capacity to complete and disseminate the research successfully. The advisory committee wants to have confidence in your proposed project. No one item makes the case for the proposed research. The strength of your proposal is determined by all of the materials submitted, including your application and your letters of support. Please know that this is much more than just uploading your CV. So a little about common mistakes that applicants make. One of the most common is that not enough detail is presented to support what the applicant is proposing to do. When there is not enough detail, the advisory committee is left to assume that the applicant is unaware of the breadth of issues or does not have the full grasp of them, especially in setting up the problem. The committee also may be left without a clear understanding of how the proposed research activities will unfold or how they will be completed. As one example, the application does not describe how the research sample will be recruited or how the sample attrition will be handled. Excuse me. A similar situation occurs when applicants do not describe their skills in supporting their research. Such skills may refer to the ways that you will interact with your sample, for example, how your foreign language skills could be used, or may refer to how you will address specific methodological needs. For example, depending on your expertise in a particular methodological area, you may seek a specialist in your department who can assist you with specific aspects of your research. For example, growth curve modeling. Another common mistake is when the proposed measures do not support the construct or they are inadequate to address the research questions. In other words, when what you have proposed to study does not answer the research questions at hand. Please ask yourself, are these the right variables to answer the research questions? And will the measures yield the information I need to address the questions I have proposed? Next, remember at this stage to keep fidelity with what you proposed at the LOI phase. After all, your LOI has been approved, and now you have been given the opportunity to submit a full application. The advisory committee is interested in seeing how the original ideas, that is, your conceptualization of the issues or problem, will be expanded upon, and how you have improved and refined specific areas, especially the research design. The last two common mistakes are related, but distinct. They include neglecting to discuss the cultural and linguistic sensitivity or appropriateness of the proposal, and neglecting to use an asset-based frame throughout the proposal. As you may recall, the seventh criteria that the advisory committee will score your application on is the cultural and linguistic sensitivity of the proposal. Please ensure that this is something you are keeping in mind throughout all sections of your application. In particular, the methodology, methods, or measures, and data analysis approaches utilized in your research should be culturally and linguistically sensitive and appropriate. Lastly, throughout all stages of your research, from question development, methods and measures, through data analysis and interpretation, be sure to utilize an asset strengths-based approach versus just utilizing a deficit approach. In fact, don't use a deficit-based approach. The fundamental principle of an asset-based approach is that every individual, family, and community has assets that should be considered within all aspects of research design. Such an approach celebrates the racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic diversity of young children, their families, and their communities. It seeks to understand how policies and systems might inadvertently or intentionally function as contributors to disparities, and focuses on how to improve systems and policies. An asset-based approach focuses on how to implement effective solutions and does not just identify more problems or document disparities. So, excuse me. We will recap by offering a few tips to avoid these common mistakes. The first is to fully describe the underlying theory or empirical research that the project is based on. The second is to provide all of the details that support your application's narrative. That is, that the project is significant, well-designed, free of confounding variables, and realistic given time and grant funds. All sections of the application and additional materials should work together to make this case. The most important tip during the upcoming writing phase is for you to discuss your ideas with a senior scholar or mentor and have the scholar or mentor provide specific feedback to you on your work. Finally, the foundation has asked the advisory committee to provide detailed feedback on how the applicant can revise and strengthen the applicant's proposal. Please refer to the email that was sent, including the committee comments, when you were invited to submit a full application. As a reminder, and Krista said this well, whether you agree or disagree, you must address the comments that you received from the advisory committee in your application. In this way, the process is not unlike a revise and resubmit for a journal manuscript. The advisory committee has chosen to provide their time to support the growth and development of early career scholars such as yourselves. Their comments are intended to enhance your work so that it can make meaningful contributions to the field while ensuring that it meets the field's expectations for rigor. The committee reviewers will be looking for your responses to their questions, comments, or concerns. If you disagree with the comments, please provide a basis in your response that clearly articulates your position. Please do not simply ignore the committee comments. Not addressing the comments or providing a response will negatively impact the review of your application. I hope that the next phase of your work goes well as you continue to develop and strengthen your applications. The foundation is looking forward to receiving these applications on October 13th, and I'm wishing you all the best. I'm back to Andrea.
Thank you, Vivian and Krista, for your helpful presentations. Before transitioning into our live Q&A, we will answer a few frequently asked questions from past cohorts. Please feel free to submit questions in the question box in preparation for the live Q&A. First question, will the foundation be providing any flexibility as a result of any changes and/or delays due to COVID? The foundation will not be providing flexibility around the eligibility requirements. All applicants must be full-time paid employees at an eligible host institution in order to apply for Ysp. If you would like to include any contingency plans regarding your methodology due to COVID-related policies, you may include a one-pager in the additional documents section of the application. Make sure to follow the guidelines of the Institutional Review Board at your institution. Next, are Ysp grants transferable in the event an awardee moves to another institution? The legal relationship of the grant is between the foundation and the 501c3 host entity. If the research project is in good standing and the principal investigator changes institutions, the first grant will be rescinded. A new grant, based on the remaining portion of the project, will be awarded, subject to board approval, to the new institution. What costs are allowable by the Ysp grants? Grants are 2 to 3 years in duration. They may support the principal investigator's salary and other direct research expenses. 10% of direct personnel costs must be used towards may be used towards senior advisors and consultants. Indirect and overhead costs are limited to 15% of the total direct personnel costs. Data from international sources may be used, but international data collection cannot be supported with grant funds. Next question, can applicants use the Ysp award to fund training or skill development related to their research project? Funds can absolutely be used for training and professional development relevant to the research project. Funds can also be used for travel to conferences and to present the research project. Where can applicants get more information about previously funded Ysp research projects? The Foundation's website contains information on previously funded projects. Visit the Meet the Scholars page in particular. Ysp focuses on the early care and education workforce with an applied implementation focus. However, the priority populations of children remain the same. Another question. In the full application budget, can the award support a subcontract? Yes, the budget can include subcontracts. The principal investigator must still maintain authority over all dimensions of this project. These subcontracts must be applicable to the research and be a reasonable use of funds. The budget justification and rationale will be reviewed for each subcontract proposed. Can one component of the project be funded by another research grant? Yes, one component of the project may be funded by another existing research grant. However, components of the project that are submitted in your Ysp application must, and this is a must, not a may, must be able to stand alone and should not be based on obtaining additional funding outside of the Young Scholars Program. Can you apply for a smaller grant? less than the 225,000, etc., if you anticipate a smaller budget would be appropriate for your research. Yes, your budget should reflect the amount of funds required to support the work proposed. 225,000 is the maximum grant award for primary data collection and analysis. 180,000 is the maximum grant award for secondary data analysis. Does becoming a promising scholar give me a better chance of being chosen as a young scholar? Promising scholars do not receive priority and consideration for Ysp research awards. They compete in future application cycles without any favored status from the foundation. If I am selected as a promising scholar, does that mean I have to accept the award before I can reapply for Ysp? No, you do not have to accept the Promising Scholars Award in order to reapply for Ysp. If you have any other direct questions at this stage in the application process, you may visit the Ysp FAQ page on the Foundation's website at fcd.us.org, or you may email additional questions to ysp@fcd-us.org. Phone inquiries will not receive a response. We will now transition to the live Q&A session using questions that were submitted during the webinar. If you have any questions, please submit them now. Please limit your questions to those general in nature and do not provide specific proposal details. Andrea, do we have a first question?
Thanks, Sarah. There was one question submitted about mentors and writing letters of recommendation and consultants. So we just want to be clear, because sometimes we use terms like senior scholar interchangeably. The mentor is meant to be somebody who helps with your proposal. They are meant to give you feedback on your full application. They're meant to help work through the research design. They're meant to help you prior to October 13th, which is the full proposal due date. The mentors can, if you would like, write one of the letters of support that are due alongside your application. So you are required to have 2 letters of support. One could be from your mentor, neither have to be from your mentor. We do also allow consultants on the actual research project. So stipends or honorariums for your consultants will be built into your budget. These are people we see as senior scholars, and they are meant to help you with the actual research process. So they can be advisors on your methodology or your analysis, the work that you're doing after you receive the award. If there are any additional questions, please submit them now using the questions tab on the webinar dashboard.
So while we're going to give you a couple more minutes to submit questions, we're going to go back to some of the planted questions we have from prior webinars that we've done for developing strong applications. We have received a question in the past about whether or not the foundation has a preference for quantitative studies or qualitative studies or mixed methods. The foundation does not have a preference on the type of research studies that are proposed. Our interest is making sure that it is a strong, rigorous proposal in which the design and the methods and the measures are, as we expressed before, cogent. So no particular preference for design. Okay, I'm going to read another one. Let's see, which one should we do? For studies that do not directly include children in the research, do we complete the demographic questions about the relevant population of children, or answer NA to the question since the children are not study participants? For studies with only adult sample populations and children are not part of the sample, then for questions directly related to child samples, an NA is appropriate. Even though children may not directly be included in the sample for the study, the findings should be relevant for the outcomes of young children in Ysp's priority populations. Therefore, where appropriate throughout the application, the relevance and indirect impact on Ysp's priority population should be explicated. Such explanations for Ysp's priority population should be clear for all studies.
So we had another question about letters of recommendation and if they should come from individuals from the same institution. So the foundation does not have a preference as to where your letters of recommendation come from. However, as mentioned earlier in the webinar, the letters of recommendation should speak not only to the research at hand, the research that you're proposing, but also to your research experience and your expertise as a scholar. So as mentioned, please make sure that anyone writing letters of recommendation for you has appropriate materials. So that includes your CV and the LOI that you submitted previously. So there was actually another question about letters of support versus letters of recommendation. So in the full application, you'll see 2 spots to upload letters of support from your institution and 2 spots to upload letters of recommendation from scholars that you're familiar with. So that's 4 letters total, but they are separate things. The letters of support from your institution versus the letters of recommendation from senior scholars. There's a question about the number of LOIs received this year as compared to the number of people who are invited forward to submit full applications. And there were 36 invited to submit full applications this year and 51 LOIs received.
We have another question about a proposal for secondary data analysis of the project for which data are currently being collected. The largest study has been approved by the IRB. Do I need a separate letter from the IRB for my study? Yes, an IRB letter should be submitted for the specific questions being asked and for the specific use of data being proposed in the Ysp application.
There's a question about the senior advisor on the grant after the award is received and the mentor during the proposal stage. These do not have to be the same person, but they absolutely can be the same person if that works for you in your research.
There's also no requirement that you choose to use 10% of your budget to have or support a senior advisor as a consultant or your mentor as a consultant.
So we just received a question about the number of supplemental documents that you can upload to the system. So anytime you see an uploaded document in the full application, you can only upload 1 PDF document for that particular question. So for a letter of support, for example, you've got to upload that within 1 PDF document. If you have multiple additional resources, you've got to combine those all into 1 PDF document and upload it as one. The system will not allow you to upload multiple documents to the same question.
So there's another question here about who should be writing the letter of support for the host institutional organization, the president of the university, the provost, or the department chair. For applicants from higher education institutions, is there a preference as to whether the letter of support from the host organization comes from the dean of a college or from the department chair, etc.? The letter of support from the host institution must be from the representative who has the authority to approve and ensure the supports outlined in the letter are going to be provided. For research universities or other higher education institutions, the letter is usually from the dean or chair of the department, where the principal investigator holds their position. Since where the authority sits is specific to each institution, the foundation does not have a preference as to what authority figure particularly signs the letter. They just need to have the authority to do so.
So another question that I'm actually going to direct to Vivian, because this is about the review process. So in the application review process, there's a question about the application being read entirely by one person, or do the reviewers just read certain pieces of the application? So in other words, can you, as the applicant, assume that the reader has read responses to the entire full application, or should each question in your application be answered as if it is independent? So Vivian, I'm going to turn this question over to you to respond to.
Sorry, I had to find that unmute button. Yes, each reviewer assigned to an application will have access to all the form responses and will read and evaluate the application in its entirety. I will also just say, as a person who read these applications once, it is taken with great seriousness. And so attending to the suggestions in the LOI is really critical. The responses that you received.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vivian. I have another question about the research proposal, the LOI versus the full application. And I'm going to read the question out, and then I'm going to turn this one over to Krista to answer. So there are two pairs of questions. The first one being the brief research project description and the executive summary, and the second one being the implications for public policy of the proposed study. So these have significant overlap in their descriptions. So in these cases, one of the questions was from the LOI and one of the questions is new, so they're worded slightly differently between the LOI and the full application. So can you clarify how the purposes of the new questions are distinct from the LOI questions? So in other words, should the responses to the pairs of these questions be completely distinct, or is there an expectation that some information will be repeated in both of these responses?
Sure, I'm happy to clarify. So the brief project description and the executive summary questions are quite similar, and the same can be said for the implications for public policy of the proposed study from the LOI and the policy relevance question in the full application. One new element of the policy question in the full application is that the applicant must also briefly describe how results or recommendations could be communicated beyond scholarly outlets. And in both cases, I think it's important to remember that the application is now going beyond the LOI. So you're building on the responses in your LOI. And in some cases, the advisory committee has given feedback on the applicant's responses. That will also require being addressed in the full application.
Thank you so much, Krista. We have one additional question about when collecting data from multiple centers, how many letters of support do you need from the centers? So honestly, that will depend on the individual places that you're working. You need one letter of support from the entity who is responsible for making decisions on who can and cannot come in to these centers. So in some places, it may be at the district level, and other places it may be at the center level. So it's got to be the entity who is in charge of deciding who can and cannot come into these centers. There's no requirement for a specific number of letters that you need. So while we read off one last question from a previous webinar, I just want to give everyone one additional moment to, if you do have any last minute questions, please type them into the questions feature now.
Okay, here's the question. Should this letter of support from the host institutional organization be an in-depth substantive letter of evaluation of the candidate, or simply a short statement saying that the institution is in support of the applicant's proposal? In other words, what should be included in the letter of support from the host institutional organization? For all organizations, the letter should do multiple things. First, confirm that the principal investigator is a full-time paid employee of the host organization that can receive and administer the funds. Please note that if funded, the foundation will expect the host organization to support the principal investigator's full-time status for the duration of the grant period. It also must confirm the organization's commitment to the principal investigator's proposed percentage of paid time as previously stated in the Ysp application. And finally, it should describe the capacity and plans of the host organization to support, such as providing expertise, materials, in-kind contributions that will be supportive of the principal investigator and the project. This can also include attendant public policy research, etc. Letters that describe more than the basic supports provided to all employees will be favorably considered by the Ysp Advisory Committee. This information can also be found in section 12 of the application form.
So thank you so much for your time today. As a reminder, if you have any additional questions, please submit them to ysp@fcd-us.org. We're going to ask that you please complete the brief evaluation of the webinar that will appear in your browser right when this webinar closes. Please remember that all applications are due on October 13th, 2022 by 8 p.m. EST, which is 7 p.m. CST, 6 p.m. MST, and 5 p.m. PST. Exceptions to the deadline will not be considered. A recording of today's webinar will be available on the Foundation's website. And we would like to thank Vivian and Krista again for their presentations. We would like to thank you all for your time and your effort on your submissions. And all of us at the Foundation are eager to receive your full applications for this year's Young Scholars Program. Best of luck to you.